Um, this is from Tim in L.A. Mike, this is a tough time for me. This is a tough time for my family, and for so many years we kept it silent. That was until I learned from 3 white Canadians, and he names them, 3 white Canadians, all in the band Rush. They did a song called Manhattan Project, and I was astonished. At the time, I was 19 and knew nothing about the destruction. I mean, I heard bits and pieces of the incident, and I knew my aunt was in Hiroshima, but I learned nothing about the magnitude of the bombing. I mean, I believed that the Japanese had that Bushido way, or the Bushido, the way of the warrior, that samurai spirit, and there was no way Japan was going to surrender. So 2 bombs were dropped, and it quelled the warrior in them. That has got to be the furthest thing from the truth. After reading the lyrics to the song, I was curious when I read this part. Imagine a man, when it all began, the pilot of Enola Gay, flying out of the shockwave on that August day. All the powers that be in the course of history would be changed forevermore. What was Enola Gay? What was that August day? What was the Manhattan Project? A friend knew the answers, but instead told me to ask my Asian American Studies professor. So I walked across campus. I asked the professor, Sensei, what is Enola Gay and the Manhattan Project? She sat me down and explained in detail the history. I then said, but wasn't it justified because of the Bushido spirit, that Japanese would rather die than commit dishonor? My professor said, true, but do you really think that children, pregnant women, would want to die? And do you really think that the elderly wanted to see the next generation die? And anyway, Japan was on the verge of surrendering because people were starving. And to be a kojiki, panhandler, would bring shame. So Japan had to surrender. And when they dropped the bomb, and then they dropped the bomb, was the site a military complex? No, she said. It was a civilian population. Why? Because as soon as World War II ended, the Cold War began. The U.S. had to prove that capitalism was better than communism. All this got me mad. Mad because my parents were ashamed to tell me the truth. Mad because they could not tell me the truth. Because in 1942, at the age of 8 years old, my dad had got his ass beaten by white Idahoans from the 12th grade. Why? Because he looked like the enemy. My mother said they would bury my dad in the snow, spit on him, kick him, he was 8 years old, and call him Little Tojo. That really got me mad. The anger and fear and shame was placed on my father. But being the good Japanese he was, his answer was shikata ga ni, or it cannot be helped. Therefore, I never learned to speak Japanese. I never learned about the forced evacuation and concentration camps, and I never learned of what happened to my aunt's plight. So for 25 years, I've been seeking the truth about World War II, and found out that Pearl Harbor was not a surprise attack, and that the bombing of Hiroshima was not about ending the war, but to display a show of force at the expense of killing U.S. and Japanese, at the expense of killing Japanese civilians and U.S. civilians. And then Tim references Hiroshima was the site of an American or a prison camp where Americans, soldiers, were being held. That made me angry. Though the above-mentioned story was written recently, it was common knowledge that GIs were murdered by Roosevelt and Truman, while my mom in Japan was worried about getting her home bombed, my aunt getting bombed, my dad getting bombed by white 17 or 18-year-olds because he looked like the enemy. I have a confession to make. I wanted blood. I wanted to drive up to Idaho, do to the old white men what they did to my dad. I wanted them to suffer and feel the wrath of a Jap. You can go ahead and say that word. I wanted to beat the living hell out of them, and if their children intervened, probably my age at the time, some younger, some older, I would kick their ass across the potato field. Then I stopped. The kid born in East L.A., me, who had nothing but a close relationship with non-white folks in a predominantly Chicano neighborhood, stopped. I realized that if I went up to Idaho and did what I wanted to do, I would be just like them. I'm a liberal, and liberals are better than the racist scum that took their anger upon a fellow U.S. citizen, an 8-year-old. And so I just stopped. My car was gassed up. I told my family I was going to leave for a week, and I just stopped. And I thought to myself, if I did this, would I be any different than the people who tortured my dad? Would I be any different than the racists in D.C. who planned the false flag attack on Japan, which I'm finding out Japan wanted to sue for peace? Or the bastard who killed my aunt 6 months after 9/11 and on his damn deathbed said that he had no remorse dropping the bomb and on his fellow U.S. soldiers too? You know, the pilot of the Enola Gay, Colonel Paul Tibbets, had I gone to Idaho as planned, I would be no different than the people I hate. My father's stress finally caught up to him. One day he collapsed, and he became a nervous wreck. We later found out he had Parkinson's, and his body is withering away. Everything that happened to my family, I have every justification to seek vengeance. But I won't, because I'm a liberal.